Well, first of all, let's have a breath test. It's not too good tonight. As happens when I go shopping. I do understand that I've complicated things a great deal already. I really have lost count of my father's identities, but the two simplest are he had an open known alias, which was Dick Oakley. His name at birth was Desmond Oakley. There was a second man with the alias Dick Oakley, or at least to all appearances he was a different man, inasmuch as he was called Herbert Frederick. At birth, apparently, not Desmond. So there's my two alias Dicks. One began life as Desmond, the other as Herbert Frederick. If I had not come across millions, certainly many thousands of coincidences, I might believe two different unconnected men decided to use the alias Dick, although neither was born Richard and neither was born Dick. What connects them most is the fact that the second Dick Oakley, the second alias Dick Oakley, died on the 6th anniversary of Fiona Green's death, and my alias Dick Oakley had, in a roundabout way, it has to be said, confessed that murder to me. At the very least, he was present at her death and didn't tell the police, or anyone else except me, which sounds slightly suspicious on its own, especially as no cause of death could ever be found, and there was another man, at least one other man there. So that's my Dicks. I often thought it was a very apt alias. On another tape today, I talked about a composite, Desmond Oakley. That was my father's real name at birth. However, he either stole or shared an identity with a second Desmond Oakley, who was born 10 years later. You'd think there might be some problems there, but apparently there was no difficulty. So we have two connected alias Dick Oakleys, who were openly alias Dick Oakleys. Mine announced it for 50 years, and the death informant put Herbert Frederick alias Dick on his death certificate, the second death certificate. And now we also have a composite Desmond Oakley, and that's all I can say. It was one person. Whether the birth certificate was forged, I don't know. If it was, the death certificate must also have been a fake. But everything he did with his life, apart from being born and dying, was done by my father Desmond. And there isn't any doubt about that. So now I have a Herbert Oakley, whom at first I couldn't explain. Well, I just made rough notes. I should have found this ages ago. But in the beginning, I was working with microfiche records, which are incredibly slow. It can take weeks or even months, certainly, and hours at a time at that, to glean the information I can now glean in a minute or two, just by using FreeBMD. The limitation to FreeBMD, I'd be better off with Ancestry Live, is that it stops 40 years ago. It claims to go through to about 83, but you'll be very lucky if you find anything after 75. And even then there are whole quarters of whole years missing. Nevertheless, it's useful if I'm going back far enough. I thought I would see how many Herbert Oakleys if I disregard the middle name, which is a sensible thing to do in this family. Because the initials are added, they're subtracted, they change, they come, they go. 3 Herbert Oakleys were born between March quarter of 1918, which covers January, February and March, and the December quarter of 1919, which covers October, November and December. The first Herbert Oakley married a Phyllis Barnes. Phyllis Barnes, therefore, became Phyllis Oakley. Phyllis Oakley I had found a long time ago, call it intuition, or just I was looking for my mother's re-entry to the UK. Instead I found Phyllis and Olive Oakley. And they arrived on my supposed date of birth, which of course made me sit up and take notice. Subsequently I discovered Olive's death entry, which gives her date of birth. The date of birth is the same date as my mother's date of birth, the 30th of June, 1915. So now I'm really sitting up and taking notice. Between these 2 women, I have them coming in on my date of birth, one of them born on my mother's date of birth. Unfortunately, that threw me. Perhaps it was meant to. And I then concentrated most of my energies on discovering all I could about Olive Oakley and ignored Phyllis Oakley. Phyllis Oakley was the one who was in fact my mother's age, according to the ship's records. And she was also the one who was married to one of the Herbert Oakleys. Right, that covers my first Herbert Oakley. Phyllis was married to him. The Phyllis who came in on my date of birth from South America. Then I get to the second Herbert Oakley, whom I'd completely ignored, although I found his brother literally years ago, and had made notes of his brother's wife, made notes of his brother's marriage to a woman called Cora Standing. If anyone had been listening to this, the surname Standing would be very familiar by now. Dennis and Cora Standing lived around the corner from Desmond Oakley and his wife Jacqueline, and it soon became obvious that they were connected to each other. And now I find, literally a few minutes ago, that Dennis was the brother of the second Herbert born in that time period. So I have another connection. The third Herbert Oakley was apparently the one who died with the alias of Dick. So I have connections there to all 3 Herbert Oakleys born between the March quarter of 1918 and the December quarter of 1919. Now, from what I already know, if Desmond Oakleys can have composite identities, presumably Herbert Oakleys can do the same damn thing. They can chop, they can change, they can swap. So it's anybody's guess, actually, which of those Herbert Oakleys died with the alias of Dick. Now, the Herbert Oakley with the brother called Dennis, whom I did find years ago, had 2 daughters. I didn't need to look on FreeBMD for that. I remember very well. One was called Susan, yet another Susan Oakley, but of course, that would be a common name. But not in one, well, yes, and perhaps in one family. Perhaps the whole damn family likes the name Susan. The oldest was called Susan, as was the oldest daughter of my composite Desmond Oakley. who was 10 years younger than me, so that's confusing for a start. And the younger daughter was called Julie. For some reason, also years ago, I got the birth certificate of Julie, not Susan. I wish I'd got Susan's. The thing I'm saying here is that I'd been on to this couple for a long, long time as being connected to my family. And I think I've mentioned my certainty that Susan, born to Desmond Oakley, 10 years after me, well, is my half-sister. She looks like my father's sister, just by the by. I hadn't said that. Her photograph is on Facebook. She's a dead spit of my father's sister. She's also the only member of any group she appears in who never smiles. No, sorry, but that's a giveaway for me. None of my family ever smiled at the camera. I've already mentioned that. My mother didn't. None of us ever smiled at the camera. If my father was behind it. I think we probably stopped smiling at the camera altogether, but that, her appearance, her resemblance to my aunt, her never smiling, as nebulous as that might seem in photos. She's announced on her faceline that she's unhappy and puzzled and wished she knew the answers to this, that, and the other. I wish I knew what her questions were. And then I add to that the fact that her Facebook best friend has the surname of Standing. This has to be the daughter of Desmond Oakley, my composite Desmond Oakley. There is just no doubt. Now I also have them connected to the alias Dick Oakley, which is to say both alias Dick Oakleys. And to my mother, who I believe came in as either Olive or Phyllis Barnes. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Phyllis Barnes married Herbert Oakley. Came in as either Olive or Phyllis Oakley on my date of birth. There is nothing else for me to believe anymore than that. There's no record otherwise that she ever returned from Australia. I've considered the possibility that she actually didn't return from Australia, but I seem to have sequential photos. She looks pretty much like the same woman. I have photographs of her from babyhood through to her death. I don't think she could have literally been two different women. But I do now have evidence that she, like my father, borrowed other people's identities on two separate occasions. One to come back from Australia, I've gone on too long.